That's right. I have wrestled with an alligator. I done tussled with a whale. I done handcuffed lightning, throw thunder in jail.
You can't stop me.
I'm going to win.
It ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward.
I won't quit.
I'll just keep getting stronger.
Stronger?
Stronger.
Hey everyone, welcome to Barbell Me Search. We got a special one today because we're actually going to talk about nutrition and not squats and meathead stuff. But this is kind of a meathead topic too. I think we can get there. We'll totally push our bias on that. But we have Gabby or Dr. Fundaro or Dr. Gab, and we have Shannon Beer. So this is the first time we've actually had Shannon on. We've had Gabrielle on before on our other podcast. So welcome you two.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks for having us.
I guess let's do this because we don't always do intros, but I think it's important just because of the kind of topic we're talking about, and we haven't had Shannon on. So I guess, Gabby, if you want to, I'm just going to call you all the Gabs in the whole sentence so that we can just get it out of the way. If you want to just give a quick background, and then Shannon will jump to you, and then Jeb will kind of start us off.
Yeah, absolutely. So for anyone who doesn't know me, Dr. Gabrielle Fundaro, I left academia 4 years ago where I was teaching exercise science and became a full-time Renaissance Periodization coach. And within that first year, I also started my own business, vitaminphd Nutrition, where I do telehealth. So RP is email coaching using our sort of RP style of nutrition recommendations. And then vitaminphd telehealth is focused a lot on helping people sort of manage their relationships with food and quite often concurrently with some GI distress.
Nice. And Shannon.
Cool. I'm a coach for Flex Success, who are a team of coaches based in Australia, but we work with clients worldwide. And I've kind of been traveling around and moving around a bit for like the past 2 years up until this point. So yeah, all work is done online and mostly with people, I guess like a range of things, including like weight loss, weight gain, weight neutral approaches. Again, similar to Gabby, like helping people just have a decent relationship with food and enjoy their lives whilst getting results. And on that topic, I also wrote a book called Life After Dieting to help people move away from macro counting. And we found that that was something that a lot of people are interested in because, you know, we typically do use that approach for a lot of people, but it doesn't always work and people need a route out as well. So that was something that we really wanted to address.
I think that was like one of the Jeb and I, we obviously work for Stronger You, but we kind of get dubbed as macro coaches. But I think one of the biggest issues, even in the research, is that like long-term success with weight loss, like that's probably, we're the worst at that. Everyone's good at losing weight. That's a Jeb line. But like, so it's interesting that you say that because I don't think a lot of people in this sphere think that far ahead. I don't know if that's, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that's necessarily true, but that's what we see. So it's sweet that we have you on.
Yeah, and I think kind of focusing here is kind of where we want to take this. Again, you know, we're kind of reiterating this tagline of like adding context to myopic topics. And one of the things that really kind of drew me into, both, you know, Gab I've met before because she did a seminar here in New York. Really cool, you know, a lot about like some gut microbiome stuff that was really amazing. So we met a while back, and obviously I started following her, and then Shannon, I followed you by proxy. And one of the things that I've seen you guys talk a lot about is this idea of bridging the gap, you know, kind of between macro counting and the kind of intuitive eating world. And so what I would really love to kind of start this thing off is, because I really want to talk about what the health at every size movement and what the intuitive eating movement really mean. And so we're going to go back to this trick that, you know, we hear every once in a while of like, let's define our terms. So could you guys give us a better, more comprehensive understanding of what the health at every size movement is, or what intuitive eating is, because I know there seems to be a lot of confusion in the nutrition world about what those terms mean.
Yeah. So I guess we can start with intuitive eating. It's a weight neutral approach to eating, but it's kind of more than that. It's an entire self-care framework that is designed to help break the cycle of chronic dieting. And there are 10 principles to intuitive eating. So it's not just about your relationship with your food, but it's also about your relationship with your body. So some of the principles include things like finding the joy in movement, honoring your hunger, ignoring diet rules, ignoring the food police, and all these kind of things. So it's to address that chronic restriction, which we know isn't, helpful long term for weight loss. And in order to kind of fix that relationship, it's necessary to put goals such as weight loss on the back burner so that you can focus on gaining a healthier relationship with your food first before going on to doing, whatever it is that you want to do. So weight loss is not a primary focus. It may or may not happen with intuitive eating, but it's not the goal of intuitive eating. And I think there's a lot of confusion about what it really is, because we just seem to liken intuitive eating to eating without macros, but that's not what it is at all. It's a complete disservice to intuitive eating TM, what the movement really is, because it's an intervention. So we use the term colloquially, but really intuitive eating, the intervention, is something completely different. And I think we kind of undermine that when we use intuitive eating to mean moving away, not tracking macros, because then it totally neglects the entire point of intuitive eating, which is not about weight loss or weight gain. It's weight neutral. It's just about focusing on your relationship with food.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point too, because I think, I don't know, when if you think about intuitive eating and what gets thrown on at Instagram, or even when the two camps argue, it tends to be arguing about the thing that you're not talking about, which is like you're just moving away from macros and blah, 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 blah. And then these arguments happen. I don't think that anyone is even defined what that is enough to have an argument about it. They just want to make a name for themselves. So that's kind of why the story isn't so simple, which is the exact reason why we started this podcast is, okay, if it's not simple, then let's talk about complex, so then we can actually have those conversations. Yeah. Which is incredible, because you basically said that just way nicer than I did.
And I'll add as well, there's a book, there's an entire book on eating,
well,
which
people would have to read that though.
Yeah,
I know.
That's also the other reason why we do this, is because we know people probably aren't going to even read this. They're going to be, oh, it's about intuitive eating, idiots. But you have to actually go do those things before you can have those conversations. And we would rather people get interested in this kind of stuff in this forum, and then maybe they'll go read the book. So I'm glad you said that, because you heard it.
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem as well, that they hear the term intuitive eating, think, oh, I know what that means, and then form an opinion on the entire movement based on their own, unlimited understanding of what it actually is about.
Yeah. I've been guilty of that myself. When I first heard intuitive eating, I was like, well, intuition sucks. Why would we follow that? And then actually
that's why I wrote the first blog on this, intuition in training, in eating and training, because people were having debates about the utility of intuitive eating and saying, intuition is useless, we don't ever use it. And it's interesting. I actually talked to Evelyn Tribole, who is one of the authors of Intuitive Eating, and the book is just called Intuitive Eating. So when people are like, what can I read? I'm like, Intuitive Eating. They're like, no, is it a book? Is there a book? Yes, it's called Intuitive Eating. So I spoke with her, and she actually said, intuition, that this word intuitive is sort of part of the problem, because it doesn't fully encompass everything that this self-care framework is about. And people think it's, like she said on Dan Harris's 10% Happier podcast, it's not just pink donuts. That's what you get, sort of on Instagram. It's like, people almost think that it is emotional eating, that it's eating based on emotion. And it really isn't. It's eating based on internal cues rather than external rules. And it's not just about eating, like Shannon said, it's also about cultivating a positive relationship with yourself. And so it really emphasizes mental and emotional health and removes the attachment of physical health to weight. So we assume that a specific weight must indicate health. And that's why it's aligned with HAES, with Health at Every Size, because it's working to remove weight stigma and remove our attachment to a specific body weight. And that's really, how we start to achieve the capability to put that on the back burner and say, it's not about a specific body weight. It's about rehabilitating my relationship with food. And so it's much more like we can compare physical therapy to a training session. Intuitive eating TM as a framework is rehabilitative. It is not necessarily, and people think, oh, you have to know how to count macros to do it. Yeah. Absolutely not.
That was the one big thing I wanted to say, because I think, and this isn't even the call out, Ben, but like one of the main things when we look at it simply is that another Ben, don't worry about it. But intuitive eating sucks if you don't have the right things to fuel that intuition. But then all that does is convert to, if you don't know how to count macros, then you can't form an intuitive eating approach based on macros. But then it just ends up becoming, you're doing macro counting the exact same way you're doing, you just didn't count it. Which is exactly not, like, that's a different thing that could work. It's just not this.
Right. Exactly. So
I think this is really cool too, because it brings into this approach, this idea of, I was talking with Lisa Lewis, and one of the things we talked about was there's this like pyramid, right? And the top of the pyramid is this idea of symptoms, right? And symptom could be weight gain or whatever. And that's actually not super important. Right below that, we have behaviors, like what's, driving these things. At the very bottom, that structural piece, that's our relationship with food. And if we don't have that, all the other stuff really doesn't matter, and we see it crumble.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I love that. That is a really excellent representation. And it's why we focus really on internal frameworks and getting that stuff, like determining our thoughts and behaviors, our thoughts and feelings around food. Those are really what are going to determine our behaviors and then our outcomes. So when we're focused just, so much on the external rules, external regulations, and external expectations, we can become a little bit numb to what's going on internally, or we just don't know how to process that. And then we're sort of stymied in really kind of any direction that we would want to take.
Yeah, and I think that pyramid is kind of the missing piece as to why a lot of people assume that intuitive eating is just eating donuts, because you do have to put your nutrition focus on the back burner, but that's not to say that you're neglecting healthful choices. It's that you're fixing your relationship with food before you're trying to manipulate anything else. You're forming that, bottom of the pyramid before moving up, and I think that's part of the confusion, is completely neglecting that idea.
Yeah, because there is the principle of gentle nutrition in intuitive eating. They just introduce it sort of later in the book so that it doesn't become like a diet rules thing. But they do talk about having an understanding of the nutritional qualities of various foods. Not that we assign a moral judgment to them, but just that we have a general understanding of, what foods help me feel full longer, what foods are energizing, what foods just sort of, sit heavily and don't digest well, and establishing that self-trust to know that we don't necessarily have to know the macros in a food to determine whether that's the right choice for us in that moment.
I think that's great, because I think that's something I encounter a lot with clients, that they say, oh, I overate. And the real takeaway from this is I feel like crap the next day. Right. And so we can say, hey, instead of saying like, well, clearly because you ate a lot of processed food or whatever, instead of saying like, hey, cool, this is an opportunity to listen to those biological cues that do exist.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
So what is it about the HAES movement that draws such ire?
What movement?
Hey, health at every size.
Okay, I was like, now let's define that.
I'm sorry.
I think there's a confusion over what the acronym stands for. It's health at every size, not necessarily healthy at every size. So what it really means is that you can engage in health-seeking behaviors at any size. And it is a movement that is designed to address weight stigma, which is very real. And we see things like people aren't getting the treatment that they deserve due to physicians not knowing how to kind of handle people of different sizes. And we also see the idea of, looking a certain way or using health or a physical appearance as a measure of physical health, which is not necessarily the case at all. Not only does it completely, neglect psychological health and well-being. But also you've got the concept of metabolically healthy obesity, where some people at a certain body weight are still metabolically healthy. Now there is an increased risk of developing negative outcomes further down the line, but you can also be metabolically unhealthy and look a normal weight as well. So the point is just to say someone's weight has nothing to do with the kind of behaviors that they're engaging in. There could be someone who looks to you to be unhealthy, who has just started on their health and fitness journey, who's now making more healthful food choices and joining a gym, getting some physical activity in. And to completely categorize people based just purely from appearance and not actually looking at the healthful behaviors completely neglects the kind of change that we're trying to help people achieve, because weight stigma does result in a lot of shame, and when that shame and guilt is internalized, it impedes health-seeking behaviors, so it's not helping anyone.
Well, in both camps, I think, like both camps meaning like practitioners and health coaches and people in the movement, argue about those exact same things, because there's people that are in that movement that have two different definitions of what it is, and it's that's why we're trying to define it so we can have a conversation about it. And hopefully someone hears this and is like, oh, they're way smarter. That's a way better definition than whatever we're doing, because it ends up being, again, this myopic to simple and adding context, but simple just is like I just hate the fact that everything's so simple that nothing gets accomplished.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah.
You simplify it to the point of it being inaccurate. It's just false. Mm-hmm. Yes. And so people are arguing about their sort of uninformed misinterpretations. And that's what's so frustrating, is like watching these debates about, intuitive eating and, can it be used in an athletic population, or like, this doesn't make any sense in the industry. And I'm like, well, what you're arguing about is not the actual topic at hand. You are discussing something that doesn't actually exist. And so, of course, you can debate it to death.
I intuitively, I played college football. I intuitively would have a 2 liter of chocolate milk, and I think I said this, in like 8 pizza pops, and I felt great. So, if I was going with that, like that was my body cue. Like I was fucking hungry. So I mean, I don't know. Like I think this is totally side topic. Intuitive eating is probably not going to be helpful for a 23-year-old football player who just wants to play video games and play football.
Well, I think that's,
or maybe it is. I don't know.
Yeah.
The part of the problem with the kind of miscommunication is that there is a lot of common ground between all of these camps and the points that they're making. And we need to understand or clearly define what we're talking about so that we can move the conversation forward and talk about the applications and the limitations of these different approaches, who they're appropriate for, when to use them and when not to use them, so that we can actually give people the help that they're looking for. For example, with the HAES movement and weight stigma, like we need to understand that that is true. And when we're talking about things such as body image and a client's well-being, that's something that we need to bear in mind, so that we're not feeding into certain things that that these camps are fighting against, for example. So I think it's very important to have an awareness and to be able to engage in discussions about these topics, so that we can, as I said, clearly define what approach is appropriate for who, when to use it and when not to use it. For example, with an athlete, like you just mentioned, perhaps macro tracking would be a great tool for an athlete who's looking to keep things really dialed in and they've got performance outcomes that they're aiming for. So there's definitely validity to that approach. And then if you've got someone who is used to chronically dieting, we should be able to recognize when they need to move away from their weight, having such a huge focus on their weight, and do an approach such as intuitive eating. And I think, if we could understand where the application is, then people are going to get what they're looking for. I think that's really what's
that was one thing I had on here, which I think you might be able to shed some light on before we move the conversation over to kind of where we're inevitably going. But obviously there's negatives. Like we like to look at everything as having a positive in a certain context, but is there situations where both of these things, like health at any size or the intuitive eating camps, might be not necessarily negative, but not a good solution in a certain context, just so we can lay out hey, we're not talking about the benefits of both of them. There's obviously other ends of it. I don't know if Gabby wants to take this one.
Yeah, you go.
So I think, so we probably need to look at this a little bit differently too, and kind of differentiate between what are sort of movements and philosophies and ideas versus what are skill sets. So when we're talking about macro tracking, there can certainly be a philosophy behind macro tracking. So what informs it and why would we use it? And then there's the skill set of macro tracking. So there are skill sets within intuitive eating TM, which I want to point out is a little bit different from eating intuitively. That's sometimes what people say, which is just, eating what they think seems like a good idea at the time. Because intuitive eating TM is an entire framework that encompasses far more than eating. But there are some skill sets within intuitive eating as a framework, such as mindfulness, or being able to identify hunger levels and satiety levels, and then eventually being able to, sort of identify the nutritional qualities of foods. So we need to, I think, differentiate that. There's ideologies, and then there are skill sets. So HAES is really a movement there certainly could be skill sets within that, but it's about respectful care. It's about enhancing health and life through joyful movement and health-seeking behaviors. And it's about well-being. And so what we're doing, what we're eating, and how we're moving is going to a place of well-being, and it's weight inclusive. So as Shannon said, that it is something that a person at any weight can do. So I don't really, when we're looking at just the principles, being inclusive and promoting health-seeking behaviors and treating people with respect and care, I'm not sure that there's a time when that doesn't apply. I mean, that to me, those sound like, yeah, we should probably do that all the time to ourselves and to other people.
I could agree.
And so intuitive eating TM was really, as Shannon said, an intervention to help folks, especially with binge eating disorders. So if you have individuals who have a significantly adapted interoceptive awareness or sensitivity, and that means that they have maybe been through a significant trauma and really cannot sense their internal hunger and satiety signals, and perhaps they're in a therapeutic setting, then you may need to work with mechanical eating first, which is another rehabilitative approach, but especially in individuals who have been dealing with anorexia nervosa, it's very important that they are refed in a careful way to prevent refeeding syndrome, which could potentially be deadly. So in that case, we may not be able to use intuitive eating, and we may use a mechanical eating approach, which is externally regulated, but it's a therapy, and it's something to help protect their health. And likewise, in individuals who are suffering with a binge eating disorder, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. And when they're working with a therapist, they may work on some, not necessarily rules, but maybe some guidelines or some numerical figures to help them determine their hunger and satiety levels, or to come up with sort of a regular eating schedule, because they may not have the sort of the knowledge or awareness of what an eating schedule might look like that could help prevent extreme hunger or a binge episode later on. So it certainly isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, and there are certainly limitations to these approaches as interventions. But again, I think that, when we're looking at the principles, and even some, the principles of intuitive eating, TM, that are things like, respecting yourself and your body. I mean, these, I think, would be universally applicable if we're thinking about improving individuals' lives. One of the best ways to do that is through liking yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's why that's why it's great to bring you on, because to even talk about those aspects, it looks like there's a negative of joining a camp and being super dogmatic in it, but we're not even talking about that. But it's good because we've defined what we're talking about, and there can be negatives here. But again, that's, if someone defines health at any size as a tools-based thing, they're going to be arguing with someone differently than someone who thinks it's a movement-based things, and that's the confusion.
Yeah.
And it's good that we have both points. Like that was like the best definition I've heard of in my life, I think.
Well, I think, people want to look at all of these as an intervention, as something that should have utility. And especially when we're having discussions with people who have a long history of dieting and perhaps they never have had any issues with the food relationship. They feel very comfortable with it. That they are looking at it from a lens of what's the utility for me and the people that I work with, what's the utility for weight management? And so I think that that's another big important emphasis, is that if you're arguing about the utility for weight management, yes, you're going to come up to some interventions that don't have that utility because they're not supposed to.
Yeah, I think sometimes we confuse the positive side effects of these interventions with the intent. Because like I've done a lot of research on mindfulness and how it can relate to weight loss. The intent isn't necessarily there, but we do see similar outcomes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I was gonna say, where do we want to bridge this? Because
I think that's where we go, right? Because we are in so when we, anyone who's listening to this, anyone who's a nutrition coach, a health coach, a trainer, whatever it might be, there is going to be a conversation around weight. There's going to be an intent from the client that, hey, I either want to lose weight, I want to gain weight, I want to get more muscle, I want performance. And with some of those clients, we actually really, our, I guess, integrity says that some of these clients, we should probably be working on these other approaches first, because without building the base of that pyramid, one of my biggest conflictions in being in this space is I have seen a lot of the rebound of utilizing a macro-based approach or a really structured approach to help people lose weight, or coming to me after the fact they've lost a lot of weight and have never built the improvement of behaviors or this relationship with food, and they potentially are in actually a worse place than they started. And so how do we start to approach these interventions of creating a better structure, a better relationship around food with people who are coming to us with that diet mindset, with that intent to lose weight? How do we, like you guys say, how do we bridge that gap?
I think firstly, it's very important, as a coach or practitioner, to be comfortable with using different tools to achieve results. And I feel like a lot of the time macro tracking is used because it's convenient and it's easy to implement on our behalf, not necessarily because it's the most appropriate approach for the client. And oftentimes, I've got the question a number of times, well, if I'm not using macros, how do I monitor a client's nutrition? How do we know they're getting results? Like, what am I supposed to do if I'm not using macros? So I think that's part of the problem as well, is not having a diverse set of tools or skills to implement to help achieve change with your clients. And it's very important as well to understand their behaviors and their thoughts around their behaviors, so like their motivations for change. Why do they want to achieve weight loss, and what's important to them, and what they've done in the past and their experience with that. So when, for example, at Flex, when we have a consultation with someone, we offer a number of different approaches. So, have you tracked macros in the past? How has that gone for you? Is it something you enjoy doing? Is it something you want to continue doing? Or would you like a different approach? And then depending on their response, we will go based off what the client feels like the most comfortable with. So I think that's one of the main things is having a number of different approaches to use and understanding what a client really needs, and also keeping in mind that if you, for example, use a macro tracking approach, that something like that can increase pathological behaviors in certain populations. So even though everything seems fine to begin with dieting, weight loss, you get increased food preoccupation, increased body preoccupation with constant body checking and monitoring. So the situation may change, so you have to be able to adapt to that, and keep your client's well-being in mind. If you notice some red flags, consider having a conversation where you may raise other approaches with the client. I think that's important as well.
Yeah. Really, I think we also have to be careful about the writing reflex, where we are interacting with an individual And we can identify perhaps some red flags, and we might have some ideas about what we think they should be doing. And I think this is something that needs to change in coaching overall, this idea of how do I get my clients to do what I want them to do?
Oh, yeah.
You know, no.
You don't.
I know, it's exactly, that's so frustrating to me. Like we're not training dolphins here, you know, we're working with human beings. And the question really is, how can I help facilitate the changes that my client wants to make? And how do I help them determine what those changes would be, what of those changes would be best for them? So I think the first step is really having a productive conversation with your client about what their values are and why, as Shannon said, they want to lose weight. What does that mean for them? And quite often we find that they want to lose weight because they dislike themselves in some way, or they dislike their bodies, and they have these expectations based on really, you know, sort of diet culture and what they see on social media. And so if we're starting from that place, it's unlikely that we will be able to use dieting as a tool to improve self-image and improve their relationship with themselves, because we're sort of feeding into that idea of you'll be happy when you reach this certain body weight.
Right.
You know, and most people have experienced they've reached that body weight and they're like, I feel exactly the same as I did before, maybe worse, or they have a short-term increase in self-esteem, which is an improvement in sort of self-perception tied to an achievement. But it's not really a lasting, deep, you know, recuperation of their relationship with self and with food. Whereas if we can help them to identify their values and behaviors that are aligned with their values and their identity, then we can focus more on those behaviors and still work toward goals, toward outcomes. But being values aligned helps us sort of remove ourselves from that external expectation of like, I should look this certain way, and more towards, I am this person and I'm fulfilling the best version of myself.
Well, I think that's where a lot of this stuff gets lost, because I think, like you said, the utility of like macro counting, blah, 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 and losing weight, huge in terms of getting to that spot. And that's why I say a lot of health, whatever, are good at getting people to lose fat. But like the way, and Jeb and I kind of see this probably eye to eye, is that that's like a way to get in to then do these things, that's okay. But if you're like, what tends to happen is they use it as an in to get them to keep paying money, and then they just get to that spot and then they never go anywhere after that, which is like, that's kind of what I would rather, like, that's what we wanted to highlight here, is that there's more to the story than losing weight generally. Maybe not for everyone, we can say that, yeah. But I mean, like, that's why the research isn't good in long-term weight loss, like, at all.
Well, yeah, and I think also, you know, if you can help people improve their relationship with food or learn sustainable habits, and you can help them establish greater self-efficacy so they're more confident in their ability to do things, more autonomy so they can do them independently. I mean, why not do that? Except that maybe it sounds like a bad business model where you're like, my clients don't need me anymore after a certain number of months, and they go on and do
mindfulness stuff. Like Jeb did a presentation in Costa Rica about mindfulness, and like he sent me all the research and stuff, and all I like could pick out of it was, I'm like, they didn't really do anything, and they sustained like a small percentage, but it was like a 5% weight loss was sustained, and they didn't even do anything food wise. I was like, what's the harm in that? Like, I obviously, if they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it. But I was like, that's crazy numbers. Like, there's people who like net negative will diet and then regain the weight back, and they did a whole like year of dieting when they could have just like literally sat and thought for like whatever it was, like 10 minutes a day. And so it was acceptance-based therapy, and it was it was like an hour class a week, and they saw much better. And the changes on maladaptive eating behaviors were insane. Right. That was the really big difference. You know, we were talking about like, you know, the only thing that the differences on dichotomous thinking, the differences on external eating, the differences on body image, all were just through the roof. With very simple strategies. Which is that bottom pyramid. Like, obviously they didn't go to other stuff, and they're like, well, like, it only got this small percentage. But I'm like, you got a lot out of almost nothing. Like, not that it's not nothing, but like you did the main thing. Not just the rest is not in the study, obviously, and that gets lost in a lot of that research. Is like, now you have something
Yeah, and the thing is, these skills are quite simple to implement once you understand, their purpose. And if you've got a client coming to you for weight loss, it's likely in a lot of instances that weight loss or a weight loss goal and, body dissatisfaction go hand in hand. So if you can implement something like mindfulness alongside these other skills that you're using, such as macro tracking or whatever it is that you decide to do, you can help your client to achieve that weight loss, but also see improvements in other things to do with their well-being. And ultimately, isn't that going to be better for your business anyway? Because they're going to be even happier with their results, because not only have they achieved their body composition goals, but their well-being has been improved as well. So it's in, your favor to do these things, even if you didn't, outside of just caring about your clients. It's probably good for your business too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So how do we start to, I want to go back to, because we're talking about coaching and how to implement strategies. I want to go back to that idea of of how we kind of expand coaching. And I think I would hope that most people listening to this aren't in this authoritarian model of coaching. But I think one of the things you guys have been talking about recently is that there does seem to be a tendency of the drill sergeant approach, which we know works for about 10 seconds, and externally motivating somebody, and then we have to kind of shift that motivation. So what do you guys propose to help take coaches out of that mindset and into this, building autonomy with our clients and building a relationship where we are facilitators versus teachers?
So one of the sort of skill sets that we both use, and that I even used in education, is this intervention, I guess you could call it, but it's something that's used in therapy. It got its start in alcohol cessation, but it's motivational interviewing. And it's defined as a specific way of having a conversation about change. And Bill Miller, one of the founders of motivational interviewing, said that, when they're doing the research and as they're shaping this mode of therapy, they're really looking at, how do we become good helpers / therapists? And I think that's a good question to ask too as coaches. How can I become a good coach? And how do I help people make change and make lasting change? And that really, I think, comes down to having a spirit of coaching that assumes, or an attitude of coaching that assumes that people do have the capabilities of making change innately, and that they have expertise in themselves and their own experiences. And they have had past successes, even if they were mixed in with results that weren't necessarily desired. So they come to you capable and equipped to make changes in many cases. And that you as the coach are a facilitator or a guide to help them, like a Sherpa, to say, this route might be a little bit rocky, this one's really steep, this might be the easiest route. Which one do you want to take? So the question is not, like I said, how do I get my client to do what I want them to do? The question is, how do I help my client identify what they want to do and why, and then how to do it, and then help them build the confidence and the autonomy that they can go on and do it independently. And a lot of that is about sort of relinquishing control and relinquishing power and forming an alliance with them. And that means that we're building rapport, we're actively listening, we're having productive conversations where we're reflecting so that we understand, we're showing that we're understanding what they're saying, and that we give them plenty of information with their permission, so that it is not unsolicited advice, that we don't try to solve their problems, that we trust sincerely that they have the best solutions, because they know their experience better than anyone else can. And so when we do that, and we give them the opportunity to make those decisions and try and sometimes struggle and then reflect and have more conversations about what we might want to do differently, over time, they start to prove to themselves that they're capable. And so then we can share in that understanding that, hey, you know what? I'm the guide, but you're the expert on you. You can do these things. You just had to have the opportunity to prove that to yourself. And the amount of just confidence and internal fortitude and mental shift is so huge. You know, over time, they do tend to just take on things with greater task difficulty, and they want to learn more. And maybe they do pick up macros over time. And, you know, they have all these tools in their toolbox, but it starts with us stepping back and saying, you know, I'm not going to change you. I'm not going to solve your problems. You can do this. I'm here to guide you.
Well, and that's another thing that I don't think, like the utility of it, like you said, people, there's an ego thing and they do it my way, blah, 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 blah. But what we found, and like we do this a lot, is that not that it makes you look lazy because you're kind of offloading it on them, but at the same time, it ups your capacity to help them, because a lot of the times, like people, like not people, but you can take on way too much, and then now you're a failure because you took ownership of their thing. Yep. Where like you can actually help your capacity. And again, let's just put it down to coaching. You could probably make more money because you have more, I guess, give, so to speak, because you haven't taken ownership of it. I don't know, Jeb loves ownership stuff.
Well, that's MI. They kind of promote that as like one of their final, you know, like Shannon and I just went through this course, and one of the final points they made is you're now lifting the burden of change from yourself.
Yeah.
You don't have to be the agent of their change. They are. And that's awesome for them. Like one of the kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say it's a slogan, but something that I like to repeat is that, you know, a good coach leaves a client thinking my coach is awesome, but a great coach leaves a client thinking I'm awesome. And that's what I really want to work toward.
And it's like, even to sell the idea, like it's not easier. Like you'll feel way better as a coach, like, because like again, you're assuming the best in people, but if they don't do those things, like I feel like a lot of the conversations that we've had just with people in our spheres, like they take so much, I don't know, pain from this experience of them not doing this thing. It's like they're the failure, and it can help both ends, I think, which gets overlooked a lot of times because it just motivational interviewing seems like, well, you're just lazy, and like, well, no, it's actually more helpful on both camps.
And I think that's the failing of the traditional like coaching approach, is to view yourself as the expert, because, you know, clients coming for you for advice on training and or nutrition, but the client is the expert in their own lives. And we have to remember that, you know, our advice when it comes to nutrition and training impacts their whole life, not just their physical health. So I think that's really key, to shift that mindset from being, you know, oh, I'm the expert, I know what you should be doing, to actually you're the expert in your own life. And as Gabby said, I am the guide to offer you alternatives and to let you decide. Like you're evoking change from them, not telling them what to do.
I think that's great too. And, you know, it almost is like, let's define our terms. And, you know, coach, like most of us in this sphere come from kind of sport background, right? Where your coach is just the guy telling you what to do, because that's what athletes do. A great athlete just does what they're told. And so then you get to this sphere, you're like, oh, I'm a coach now. I'm supposed to tell people what to do. And you're like, yeah, that doesn't work with the actual population.
Well, it works with some populations, but like not.
Yeah,
they got to be.
That's where the concept of informed consent comes in, and the distinction between compliance and adherence, because we kind of use those two words interchangeably when actually they have quite different meanings. So adherence is something that the client agrees to do. Compliance is almost just like following a set of rules, that, you know, whether or not you've agreed to the rules necessarily. You might agree to follow what's being given without agreeing to the specific rule set, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you had a cool thing. Like you compared it to like the Just Say No movement with abstinence from sexual education and all this stuff, and like it's like you use that story to say, did that ever work? Like, just say no to drugs. Right. And they're like, you get them young and like, you got to sign this thing. I don't think it ever worked. Like, maybe I would love to see actual data on the percentages of which it worked. And it was probably very low.
Yeah, I think Dare, I think I actually might have like made things worse. That was like
the great shirts though.
Like
I know, right?
But even like those pot commercials, have you ever seen those old pot commercials? They're like, it'll make you crazy, and they're like doing parties, and there's ladies in the background, and like, you made pot look like, you said no, but like you made it look really good, and like Dare, kids didn't even know what cocaine was.
Yeah,
like, now they know. Like
exactly. Yeah, but that's the thing. And I've likened, you know, abstinence only education in the nutrition sphere is just as ineffective as it is in the sex education sphere. You know, like people are going to have sex. People are going to be in a tempting food environment. And to just tell them, hey, don't eat that stuff, just have more willpower, just have more self-control, you know, then the clients internalize that and think that, oh, I don't have willpower, I don't have self-control, I can't trust myself around food. Well, the messaging is completely wrong. It's completely ineffective. It's not evidence-based in any way. And it's really just, you know, like you guys are saying, it's kind of like a little bit of a lazy approach to just say, like, oh, this is tough love. You know, no, it's just ineffective. Well, so there are ways that we can help people navigate safe sex, navigate their food environment, you know, by informing them about the use of various birth control methods or various ways of eating food in a tempting and food environment. And then they can actually make an informed decision that's best for them, and then, you know, look at the outcomes and see if they want to do something different next time.
Yeah, it's like you got to put the condom on the banana, and then that's, you basically just, I don't know if you can kind of turn that story intuitive eating, but sorry, it was just funny because like that part of the article, I was like you, all your article is great. I was like, that part, like I get that now. Like it's like people get stories more than they do the other stuff. I'm like, yeah, okay.
And right. that's really from an article too. That is, I didn't make that up. That is from an article that they mentioned, like, you know, just like the Just Say No movement. It was about an article on the failing of willpower. Like, it just doesn't work. It's not that, you know, there's something wrong with you or you don't have enough willpower. It's just that is not an effective intervention.
That's, yeah, me, you know, one of my big pet peeves is that whole discipline is greater than motivation. It's like, then you clearly don't understand what actual motivation is. Go read a book on self-determination theory.
Seriously.
So I think this is, so I want to go back to this adherence versus compliance, because I think this gets at the gist of what we're talking about here is client-based coaching versus coach-based coaching. And I think that's what you guys are kind of, all of this stuff comes in because, again, one of the things that I see a lot in coaches and in this whole sphere is, you know what, you just got to let those clients go because they just don't want it bad enough.
Yeah.
Right. And so what, and people get really on both sides. Like sometimes people are like, well, what, you know, then you're a bad coach. But again, when a coach says that, to me, it's like, you are acting in the same manner that you're accusing your client of acting, right? Just because you don't have the skills possibly to help this person doesn't mean that they don't want it. So how do we approach that?
Yeah, I think having an understanding of, as you say, what kind of willpower really is and how it's not necessarily a resource that someone should have within themselves. We're expecting people to come, you know, with 100% commitment and 100% drive, and we're confusing kind of ambivalence for a lack of a will, you know, which doesn't really make sense. If someone's come to you and they've requested your services, they've got the will. Like, that's it, you know, they want to change. And it's about helping them to achieve that change, not just by telling them what to do, but how to do it and how to navigate these kind of situations. Like Gabby mentioned, tempting food environments, you know, it's not just a case of use your will to resist the food. How about putting things into context and understanding the interactions between our environment, our brains, and our biology, you know, like, because we can't separate the mind from the body, for example. So someone saying that it's a lack of willpower when they're exposed to a lot of food cues, or, for example, one clear example is cortisol reactivity in high and low responders to stress. So we know that the way that you respond is going to determine, or likely has an influence over, your eating behavior. Some people, when they're stressed, completely don't want food at all. Some people, it turns into emotional eating, and there are biological underpinnings to that. So helping to put someone's behavior into context and understanding that actually we are a result of our environment, our psychology, our biology, like all of this into one thing. You know, it's not just a matter of making decisions completely removed from our environment or removed from our emotional and cognitive thought processes. So I think having that understanding, a more holistic approach, and, you know, understanding all the different exposures and cues and all the rest of it, can actually help to contextualize what the client is going through and normalizing their behaviors and their responses. And then as a coach, knowing what skills are necessary to help, you know, I guess build someone's willpower and foster that kind of motivation that's already within them. You're just kind of revealing it to the client by, for example, aligning it with their values or something like that. So having those skills is really important, rather than just depending on your client to know, you know, to always be 100% switched on to these things.
Yeah, I think we really pathologize this ambivalence, which is just sort of wanting two things that are at odds with each other. So maybe a person wants to lose weight, but they also want to eat a cupcake at their kid's birthday party. And now they're in this place of ambivalence. They don't know which one they should do, and they might choose in either direction and feel some kind of way about it. And we praise if they don't eat the cupcake, and then we shame if they do eat the cupcake, although there's really no moral high ground to either one. It's just whatever decision is best aligned with their values, and then ideally align their goals with their values. So where really we can help people is giving them the tools to make the decision that they'll feel best about in that moment, by helping to evoke their values, and having a discussion about that, so they can identify, who am I? Am I the type of person that feels good about giving myself permission to eat a cupcake because I know that in the backdrop of, you know, an overall nutrient dense diet that's, you know, in an energy deficit otherwise, this cupcake doesn't matter. It's just delicious. I enjoy it and it's great and I move on. Or do I feel better not choosing the cupcake because I think, oh, I don't really need that right now, and I actually don't like cupcakes that much. It's just I'm very food suggestible, as we all are.
That's when you're
So,
a Sherpa.
yes, exactly. That's where you're the Sherpa, is that you help them make that decision. You don't tell them which decision is right or wrong. And that's where it becomes really client-centered, that we are giving them, you know, here are all the options. There's not one that's better than the other, you know, according to me or anyone else. It has to be what's according to you. And ideally, it's coming from a more positive place. And when we're talking about changing motivation, it's not really like increasing the level of motivation so much as it's changing the source. I think of it moving laterally from external regulation to more internal regulation. It's something that I think is useful, or identify with it in some way, or I enjoy doing it. Those are really the key sources of motivation that we want people to derive their behaviors and actions from, less so maybe the, oh, I should do this or not because my coach is going to shame me. You know,
I think it goes both ways too. Like that's where it's like, it's sweet that you kind of use that situation, because like we've dealt with hundreds of clients. Like that is the situation. It's like, I'm going to a birthday party and I don't want to enjoy cake and I might feel bad, blah, 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 blah. But everything that they kind of think, usually the coach, if they're in that old model, so to speak, they also feel shame when they do this thing. And then it's just like this cycle that like doesn't have a completion loop on it, because everything has an attachment to it that isn't even real. Like
I thought you were just playing.
But it's not like a made up thing.
I thought you were just playing to my bias. I thought she was just playing to my bias by throwing out the dialectical model there.
This is where
like I live in this, like my conversation with clients is always like, hey, two opposing truths can exist. Like that's it.
This is where I want to go before we have to close it out, because I know Gabby's got to go. So I hate not trashing, but I hate trashing on old ideas, because I know there's gonna be an avatar of people listening to this be like, listen, I didn't read motivational interviewing, I didn't read intuitive eating. Like I just like, I thought I was here to help people because like macros work and stuff. How can they, I guess, go back to this do no harm and like help their clients and maybe start to build that? But how can they do good now without being the thing that we're saying that they possibly could be doing if they're not informed by this other stuff? I know that's like a heavy one, but I feel like you guys would have some good advice.
Yeah, I think that is part of the thing as well. We don't assume that anyone's doing this, you know, on purpose. I do think people genuinely do want to help others. And it's just more so understanding your own limitations, or even the type of person that you want to work with. You know, if you're not interested, or if this kind of style of coaching isn't something that you feel like you want to do, or you can do, or you do, then that's fine, as long as you're aware of who you're working with and what their goals are and what they like. You know, if you're just a macro coach, whatever you want to call it, and you work with people who love that approach, not a problem, you know. But if you start to identify kind of friction between you and your client, it's worth either, you know, having a think about your approach and then looking for these skill sets such as motivational interviewing, having an understanding of behavior change, you know, all of these different models, ACT, CBT, DT, you know, whatever it is that you want to do, and knowing, you know, who it's appropriate for. So you could look to expand your own skill set, and then you're more able to serve more people, or be very clear about who you want to work with. And I think if you are working with someone who you thought, you know, you were a good fit, and then you notice certain things that aren't working, you know, paying attention to your clients' well-being and listening to them. I think that's one of the key things, is listening to them, and not asking too many questions and just letting them speak rather than you know, talking to them. All of these things will help you to identify who you should be working with and what you could be doing yourself to help fill your own kind of gaps. So understanding your circle of competence, I think, is really
You're allowed.
key as
This
well.
is one friend like listened to our one podcast, and he's like, we talked about camps, arguing, and all this stuff, but it's like people aren't allowed to practice and hone their skills and learn new things. It's like if you're not at the end point, you're a fucking idiot. And so I love that you framed it that way, because I think that if you have an interest in this stuff, you can still do good, but still move towards just evolving your practice to then have more tools to then serve more people, as opposed to I'm not good enough, so I'll never be there, and I'm never going to get there because I didn't get a PhD like Gabby. I don't think that you guys are, I know you're not saying that, but it's like I'm glad that you framed it that way, because we have kind of shit on some things, but it's not with that intent.
Right. Yeah. It's just that we need to be cognizant of the most sort of effective applications of all of the potential interventions. And so I think it is, you know, not necessarily that you have to go to a deep dive and like read every single one of these books, although that would still be hugely beneficial. But just having a general understanding based on some, you know, actual piece of literature. So, you know, that way you can say, oh, okay, I understand what these definitions are. Now I can have a productive conversation about it. And I think when engaging with clients, one of the best tips that I just really loved from that course was, you know, if you're starting to feel resistance with your client and you feel like there's maybe an adversarial relationship or something developing, stop doing the thing that you were just doing. Just do less of that thing. Like, you don't necessarily have to add a bunch of, you know, new tools, but like if something is not working and it's like, you know, you're having this tension between you and your client, whatever recent thing you just did might not work for them. And so maybe just don't do that and take it in a different direction. You know, that would be, I think, kind of the starting place. And then also maybe, you know, adopting some of the attitude that your clients are capable and that you don't have to solve their problems and you're not going to change them, that they really can do that themselves, that humans have this innate desire for growth and development, and that they will flourish, that they will grow and change over time, so that, you know, you can kind of lift that burden from yourself and then really give them the credit for all of their efforts.
Yeah. And I think being open-minded when you do hear about different approaches, you know, for example, let's just say intuitive eating, not just dismissing it because you think you know what it means, and also understanding that even if it's not something that you are going to use, it doesn't mean that it's redundant and doesn't work for certain people, you know. So you can acknowledge that, okay, cool, this isn't something that I'm going to use in my coaching practice, but that has no reflection on intuitive eating as an approach. It doesn't mean that it's not good, you know, it's just not something that I'm going to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the idea of just stop doing what's causing a problem, because that's like so simple, but we don't. And it's like the teddy bear. We talk all the time about the teddy bear. Is everyone's got their teddy bear, and sometimes we might inadvertently kill their teddy bear.
No, try to kill it.
Or, yeah, try to kill it. So like, oh yeah, you know, you drink 8 drinks a night. Like, why don't you stop doing that? And they're like, I can't believe you would accuse me of being an alcoholic. You're like, oh shit, like I didn't realize that was their thing.
Well,
you know,
I don't know. Like, I feel like maybe it's just, I would do exactly that. Like, not go after it. Like, we have, like, with our company, we'll have coaching swaps every once in a while, but they'll like say like this thing happened. Like, I'm not going to go fucking do the same thing. Like, I literally go the exact opposite. Works every time. It's like, like they literally said, I do not want you to do this. Why fight that battle now? Like, it's, like, they're holding their teddy bear. Like, Jeb, you can't even kill their teddy bear because it's like, I'll die before my teddy bear. Like, at least now you have to convince them with all these other techniques that you're saying just let go of the teddy bear. Maybe that's where this whole thing is all teddy bears.
Yeah, and I don't even know if I would say it's convincing so much, because that's the thing that I think we have to be careful, that we're not using motivational interviewing on people, or we're not using it on them. We're not trying to be like sly and sneaky and like, oh, I'm going to surreptitiously change your mind. It's that if that person deep down is undecided about whether they want to drink their 8 drinks a night, then the conversation can help them decide if they want to or not. And maybe they decide of their own volition, hey, you know what, like, it's just okay. Like at some point when we get old enough, we're like, I don't necessarily need to carry my teddy bear everywhere with me, but like, I need to make that decision. If someone else tries to take my teddy bear, that's going to be super upsetting. But like, at some point I'm like, I don't need Teddy today.
And that's good you highlighted that. Like, that's like, I feel like I'm a diabolical like person, but like I've read books on like manipulation and all that stuff. There's a fine line between like what you said and manipulation, and they use the same exact skill set. The one difference is I'm trying to get this from this person because I believe it's right, as opposed to, like you said, sherpaing them to get their own thing. But I don't even know if most people realize that. I know that there's some people who are sociopaths that know it. But it's funny because it's like the good and the bad. Like, it's such a fine line between all these skill sets on how to use it for good or for bad, if we make up a definition for all that. But it's just, you can go either way. Just try to do it the better way.
Yeah. And I think that happens innately when we sincerely approach our clients, forming an alliance, trusting that they're capable of doing these things, that we can just say, like, I don't have to try to convince this person to do anything. I don't have to change their mind. I'm not doing anything to them. I'm doing something with them.
Cool. Let's wrap this up. What I know we're talking about all this comprehensive stuff. I guess let's start with Gabby. Where do people find you, and kind of what do you got going on that maybe they can look up, and then we can do the same thing with Shannon?
Yeah, so I'm vitaminphd on Instagram and Facebook, vitaminphdnutrition.com. Shannon and I have been co-authoring the Bridging the Gap series. You can find the first 2 articles on my website and the Flex Success website and RP website. And I think Eric Helms has posted. It's kind of on a few different websites, Stronger Experts. So I strongly encourage folks to go read those first 2 articles. And then Shannon and I will be releasing the 3rd and 4th articles, which are covering our proposed coaching model called comprehensive coaching that ties all of this together and is working to bridge the gap, not just between these sort of diet camps, but also between coach and client, because that's a conversation that I think is really neglected. We often have coaches coming together to talk to other coaches about how to coach. And one of my clients and I have had some really good, productive conversations about why it's important for us to be talking with our clients, that we need to listen to their feedback as well. And that's really one of the ways that we can lift the whole industry up, not just the coaching industry. You're also part of a panel of a group I just joined. Yes, the Nutrition Coaching Global Mastermind. Yes. Yeah, the NCGM. So this is, I'm incredibly honored. Eric Helms invited me to join the board of advisors on the NCGM with Joe Klimczewski, Paul Revelia, Brian St. Pierre, Corey Probst, Jen Souders. We facilitate monthly discussions with experts in the industry, and we discuss a number of different topics that are pertinent to online coaching. So we started talking about sort of the, the legality, the current climate and future perspectives. And so we have a number of different topics that we're going to be talking about coming up. We've also just talked about scientific method. We'll be talking about actually motivational interviewing next time. So it's something that I really encourage people to join because they are able to ask questions as well. And so they can kind of firsthand have their questions answered and listen to a discussion from panelists that are working to improve sort of the integrity and ethical practice of the industry and help us all become, more evidence-based and effective coaches.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
What's the flex? What's the flex success got going on?
Yeah, so I think Gabby summed up our articles very well. So hopefully the last two will be out soon, and as she said, they can be found on either of our websites. And then just as handles, flex_success on Instagram, and then my own Instagram is just Shannon Beer _.
Nice.
Shannon does the best infographics ever.
Really good. Yeah. I mean, if people aren't following both of you, they're a little bit slow to the game, but hopefully.
No, we're not. Remember, we're trying not to trash people.
Oh, that's right. We're supposed to.
We're trying to make everyone better, and then like come up with better solutions. That's kind of how this is evolving, because we notice probably everyone kind of goes to that phase where they're just like, everyone's stupid, but no one's actually coming up with solutions.
I don't think we've actually said that.
Well,
but regardless, if you're not like these are both account. I mean, Gabrielle's covers a huge swath of information. Shannon's stuff is I'm very biased because I just enjoy all of the content. I think it's very applicable to coaches in general.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, ladies, for coming out.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
That's right. I have wrestled with an alligator. I done tussled with a whale. I done handcuffed lightning, throw thunder in jail.
You can't stop me.
I'm going to win. It ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward.
I won't quit. I'll just keep getting stronger.
Stronger?
Stronger. Stronger.